Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. Well, guess what? I'm doing one of my favorite kind of jobs, which is resurrecting an older scooter and a modern scooter, but they're now nearly classics. This is a 2002 or 2003 Vespa ET4. It's been sitting for about 10 years without use. Probably in the corner of somebody's garage. That's just kind of what happens. It's got 1,980 miles on it, so less than 2,000 miles. And back when I got into Vespas over 25 years ago, you would refer to this as a barn find. But it was with a vintage Vespa, you know, the shifty style Vespas. But guess what? These modern Vespas are now starting to turn into barn finds. So I want to share with you everything you need to do to resurrect a vintage Vespa, a modern Vespa, something like a Vespa ET4 or an LX 150, pretty much the same steps, they're just different body styles. What you'll need to consider and what you need to get it back running. So today I'm gonna get it running. There's gonna be several other recommendations and I'll talk about that throughout the video. Enough of me talking, let's get started. So before you even start, I mean, you can see somebody wipe down the bike. It looks pretty nice. I mean, usually when they've been sitting for 10 plus years, they're completely covered with dust. Fortunately, this example's been stored indoors. Sadly, if they're outdoors, they're gonna be in much more deteriorated state, like the upholstery is gonna be in horrible shape. The paint's probably gonna be burned out. The speedometer is gonna be burned, kind of all yellowed. Same with the headlight and lenses. And much of the metal finishes on the engine and the front fork are going to be deteriorated. But scooter's got, yeah, it's little shelf rashes, some little dings. It obviously fell over at one point, but not much to it. So before we want to start, we'll want to look at the oil. There's two things you want to check for. A lot of times you give the oil a little sniff and there might be gas in the oil because the fuel system, the fuel valve is deteriorated and sometimes it will trickle the gas into the oil. And that's really a bad situation. You want to be starting a motor for the first time in 10 years with gas contaminated oil. Fortunately, this oil's, you know, pretty slick. Obviously, I definitely recommend changing it because it's really old oil. It could be 10, it could be 15 or 18 years old. Who knows? It's definitely probably been changed once, you know, considering 2,000 miles, but always want to check that dipstick on any of these older four-stroke Vespas located on the left side. So just see if there's oil in there. If it's severely overfilled, then that's kind of a good indication that gas is leaked from the fuel tank through a faulty fuel tap and a bag carburetor into the engine because it goes into the intake and leaks past the rings. Other things to look for, obviously the battery's going to be stone dead. The customer dropped us off, says, oh, maybe you can charge it. You let a battery go dead, and if it sits dead for more than a week, the battery's just done. Just give up on it. You just need to buy a new battery. And don't be going on Amazon and buying those replacements because you pick them up, they weigh about half the weight of like a proper battery, whether you get an original Yuasa, or you could save a few bucks and get a nice name brand. Usually for the aftermarket batteries, we carry Parts Unlimited or BS batteries, which is a French company. They tend to have really good service life, have a lot of weight to them, so they have the right amount of lead and capacity. So we'll definitely need to put a battery in here. We could try cranking it. I can pretty much guarantee if it's been sitting for more than even 3 months, it's probably not going to start. Carburetor's going to be clogged. It's good it does have a key with it. Keep in mind all these Vespas, you know, starting in 2001 for the United States, even all the way back to 1996, Vespa started using immobilizer chip keys. So there's a chip in here. So if it's missing that chip, I have some videos on how to program extra keys, but if you're missing all the keys, you're going to need to replace the whole entire lock set along with recode the ECU or CDI. It's actually a CDI box, which is just a nickname for a capacitive discharge ignition system. And that's located right under here. I have some other videos on how to take this apart and get that black box out. And we would need to code it to a new set of keys before you can go any further. But fortunately, there's keys with it, key for the top case. I don't know if the master key, which would be like a red or kind of a brown color key, that's pretty nice to have with one of these older scooters, because then you're able to just cut a key and program it into the scooter. So these may be an older scooter with a carburetor, simple things like a carburetor, but they do have an immobilizer key, which makes them really difficult to steal and kind of expensive to duplicate keys, or if you lose all the keys, it's going to be even more expensive. So open up the seat and kind of pull out. Somebody's got a cover under here, a Vespa cover. The warranty book. Yeah, all the original stuff under here. I can see some dust build up. These ET4s, they came with a carburetor that was made by a company, Walbro. You can't get nearly any of the replacement parts for those carburetors. They were never that great of carburetor. You gotta know when to fold and know when to hold. So this is definitely a carburetor you wanna be folding with. Not even worth the effort to even rebuild them, in my opinion. Just wanna go with a brand new key and carburetor, which is the OEM carburetor from the Vespa LX. Unfortunately, it's still available as a nice OEM replacement part. It's been perfectly calibrated for this motor. Part number on the Scooter West web store is CM129214. So I got a brand new carburetor ready to go. And there's a little bit more to the fuel system than just putting the new carburetor in there. We're gonna go ahead and replace the fuel tap, drain the tank. The fortunate thing about these modern vintage Vespas, as I seem to be calling them, they have a plastic fuel tank, which is a great thing. You know, a lot of times people consider plastic as like less superior. Well, the good thing, they don't rust, and usually the varnish will not adhere to the tank. Hardly ever replace fuel tanks on these scooters. They're just really robust. They hold up really well, but I take that little sniff and it smells like nasty old fuel. So we're definitely gonna drain that out, replace the fuel line, and there's that brand new key and carburetor. This was the OEM carburetor that was used on LX 150 from 2006 to about 2008, 2009. They did go to a different design with a double cable, so there's a couple different small variations. But fortunately, this carburetor will fit the Vespa ET4, you know, that was sold in the United States from 2001 to 2005. These are great scooters for do-it-yourselfers, easy to work on, super reliable. You just really can't go wrong with the 150 Vespas from 2001 all the way to about 2014. Super easy to work on. So we'll go ahead and replace the battery. Single Phillips screw right here. And typically I like to put a new battery in it first, just to see if all the electrical subsystems work. Usually want to have a big number 3 Phillips screwdriver, remove the battery terminals. I see a lot of do-it-yourselfers, they don't tighten the battery terminals tight enough, and if you have a loose battery terminal, you're definitely gonna have issues. These terminals are pretty clean. You wanna make sure they're free of any corrosion, so you get a nice connection. But this battery's got nothing left in it, so time for it to go to the recycler, get turned into a new battery. So somebody put this power source one in here. It's kind of, you could even see it's kind of swollen. That's pretty normal for a battery that's on its way out and oxidized the lead plates in it. So there's the new battery. There's a negative terminal, a positive terminal. Negative terminal is going to go on the right side. So if you're sitting on the scooter, the right side, and just drop it right in there. I already have a little bit of dielectric grease, which is like a silicone grease on the terminals and the screws. So go ahead and loosen the screws, or if it's a brand new battery, sometimes they don't even have the square style nut installed in the terminal. So we'll start with the positive. And you can see the wire kind of goes across the battery with this model. Make sure it's nice and tight. And same with the negative. The ignition switch is off, so you shouldn't really have, you might have a tiny little spark. If it like starts cranking, it might have a stuck starter relay. Not too often, but I have seen that on these. The battery go dead usually, and so if there's anything, any sparks or anything weird, you might want to stop. Usually I'd leave this cover off because I do want to test the charging system once we do have the scooter running. So I got a new battery in there. We'll put the key, I'll kind of just check everything, see what happens. So the good thing is I see the immobilizer light flashing. It says Piaggio code. That means the black box is getting power. That's a good thing. And we'll turn it on, and I can see it's still blinking. That's actually not good. That means there's no power going to the ignition. And oftentimes you might have to cycle the switch a couple times. Let's see if we got it. You know, so these switches will get oxidized and they won't work. So that's the red kill switch. That's what it's cycling. Let's see what happens here. I can hear a relay clicking in there. It definitely needs a new kill switch, I think. So there's our first problem. I kind of got it to work right there. And what I notice is when I turn the key on, it blinks once and turns off. That's a good thing. But I certainly probably want to recommend replacing that kill switch because I can hear the ignition relay clicking like crazy because the contacts in this switch are oxidized. I see the headlights coming on. That's good. High beam, low beam works. Left turn signal is working. Right turn signal is working. The horn works. Let's see if we have a brake light. So the rear brake, the front brake. I can tell you that front brake lever doesn't feel so good because that brake fluid is really old. It's good, it's got a pretty low tank of fuel. The clock doesn't work, but that's quite difficult to replace that watch battery that's integrated into the dashboard. That's a whole nother video I think I've covered in the past. So let's just see what happens. So I'm gonna pull a brake and I'm gonna push the start button. And you hear that spin? Sometimes the starter Bendex, which is a gear that engages with the starter motor and it pops right out. Sometimes it won't engage, but the second time I pushed a button, it engaged. And it's probably not gonna start because I know the fuel is just so old in it. But the good news is I do have that Piaggio code light blinking once. So most likely I do have a spark and ignition system. I certainly have an issue with that kill switch that we'll follow up with later. So on to the fuel system. So we know our oil's okay for now. I'm gonna definitely wanna change it. Need some TLC with the brake fluid. The tires definitely need TLC. The rear is completely bald. The front is the original tire to the scooter. I probably wouldn't even recommend riding on it, even to take it on a test ride. New tires are gonna be a lot grippier. This could put you in a bad situation. Don't want to hit the ground because of that. It's got a completely bald tire. But the next step is we're gonna go ahead and drain the fuel, and we're gonna go ahead and replace the fuel filter and the fuel tap. This fuel tap is commonly referred to as the petcock. This part is pretty much found on the Vespas 150s in North America from 2001 all the way to about 2009 they had this. So the most common Vespa 150s, they use this style fuel tap, and it has a vacuum operated fuel valve in there as well, the petcock. So the part number is 575321. We sell hundreds of these every year. You know, the fuel deteriorates it over time. That's your fuel filter right there, and it's got a little O-ring that sometimes leaks. And to get access to that valve, it's going to be on the right side. So, all right, so on to draining that old fuel. Pretty much gasoline that's, I would say, over a year old. It's really just not ideal to run in a scooter with a carburetor in it. Probably just not run it at all. I mean, it probably could be diluted with fresh gas, but a lot of the products of the gas that make it combustible have already evaporated away. I removed a single screw here, and that's how you remove this side skirt. A lot of people ask, like, why is there these two tones? A lot of dealers back in the days, they would swap the parts between a white scooter and a blue scooter, make a two-tone scooter. I can tell you one thing, this scooter has actually just been resprayed because I see the paint on those grommets there. So at some point it's gonna be painted this. And now we're gonna go ahead and look for that fuel tap. And it's located right here. This is some of the hoses for the emission system. And we'll see if we can get to there's a screw, and it also has a socket head on it. I think it's a 7mm. And it's essentially a little hose clamp. And we need to get a little ratchet in there. We'll loosen that up. So I have I think a 7mm socket and this little flexi wrench. Kind of don't have it in the best position, but loosen a little bit. I can tell the clamp's like rotating right now. I have this little tray right here, and I know there's not that much gas, at least based on the fuel gauge, hopefully working. Sometimes when the scooter's been sitting for 10 years, the fuel gauge will be bad too, so keep that in mind, it may not work. So at this point, I'm all gloved up, and we're gonna pull the fuel tap out. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and pull the fuel tap out, and usually you're gonna have a splash of gas come out. Well, guess what? Nothing at all. So the gas is actually all evaporated away. You can see all this varnish and goop on this. This fuel tap's probably not something you want to reuse. We'll go ahead and somebody put a regular clamp on there. That's not like an original, so at one point somebody has messed with this. We'll probably flush the tank a little bit with some fresh gas, just to get any of these residual flakes of varnished up gas out of the tank before we put the new fuel valve in there. All right, so to remove the fuel valve, we could undo that hose clamp. I'm gonna replace the fuel line, so we'll just go ahead and cut that. So the larger uppermost connection is the fuel line. The lower connection, usually this hose is in pretty good shape, despite being an older hose. This is your vacuum connection to the intake manifold. Another item sometimes you need to replace on this age of scooter is the intake manifold, just because it's all dried up. This one actually looked okay. So I kind of rocked that hose off. There's a little clip there. You could just throw that part away. And the little clamp that's on the little spigot of the fuel tank under here, it looks just like a hose clamp like that. You can see it's got both a hex for a socket here. So you could use a 7mm socket, or you could use a Phillips if you're in the right angle. So I'm gonna change the angle of this. They kind of had it where it was faced towards the body of the scooter, which wasn't very ideal. And I'll kind of leave it in place. You wanna have it just tight enough to hold in place. And we'll go ahead and flush some fuel through the tank here. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it just a little splash of gas through the tank, kind of flush it out, because gas is a solvent, kind of will clean out. Spraying a little bit. I do have a little pan under there. It does drip on the muffler, which isn't the most ideal. If you had somebody to help you, that'd even be more useful. Kind of capture the fuel. Make sure it's clear up there. You see some flakes coming out. Have gloves on, probably don't really want to be touching gas. And at that point, it's looking like it's, looks pretty clear coming out. There's definitely some little flakes that came out. So we have the brand new fuel tap. With that hose clamp in place, you could just kind of feel your way around and pop it right in the hole. Push it straight up in there. And wipe up the fuel. Kind of don't really want to have puddled gasoline around. And so this has like a little spigot. You could have it in different positions. It will kind of point maybe 15 degrees kind of towards the carburetor. And at this point, we can tighten that hose clamp up there. I think it's safe to say that it's fairly clean. It does have that filter. So you could do that, or you can get in there with a ratchet. So probably the easiest way to tighten this little hose clamp is just use a little stubby screwdriver. You don't need to get too tight, it's just enough to hold the fuel tap in place. So just like that. There are a couple hoses. We're gonna leave that vacuum line in place. Next, we're just gonna go ahead and replace the carburetor. All right, so we're gonna get the carburetor out of here. So a little flat blade screwdriver. This is kind of what's needed to start. So this is your intake manifold. It may need to be replaced. We'll find out quite quickly once we get the new carburetor in there. So go ahead and loosen that clamp. And you kind of want to loosen it more than you think, because all that, you know what? It looks like sawdust. Like maybe this is in a workshop or something. It's kind of weird looking dirt. And then there's a clamp on the intake boot. And if needed, you could replace these clamps. They usually are fine. A couple hoses that are connected. There's a hose I usually typically never reuse, and it's this hose right here. Somebody did some weird hack on here with electrical tape all over. It's normally a vinyl tube. We're gonna pull the fuel line out, which I just cut all the fuel tap. The thing's hard as a rock. Not, you know, just from being old. And then you kind of lift the carburetor from the back, because it is in that manifold. That's an original manifold, so it's a little on the tight side. You see a pair of wires right here, and they go into this little boot that's sometimes clamped here, sometimes it's clamped to the frame depending on the year. So we'll get these connections out of the way, probably cut that zip tie. And any of these zip ties, they were kind of put there for a reason, the original zip ties, so may want to replace them. This hose still looks pretty good. It's part of the evaporative emission system, but now I can get to these, this clamp right down here. So we'll kind of pop that clamp open with a flat screwdriver. And some of the wirings for the charging system and the starting system, but they have normally this tubing that goes over these two connections. So there's going to be two connections under here. They're nearly identical. This male and then female on the other style. And there's two functions. One's for this black little box right there. That's your automatic choke, or they call it bi-starter, so it enriches the fuel. When you're starting a motor cold, we'll go ahead and save that little tube right there. You can see some little debris. Probably mice have been in here, so you may want to check the wiring. And then this little device is a carburetor heater, and typically that's not included with the replacement carburetor. It only gets warm on really cold starts, and it kind of warms the carburetor, keep it from icing over. And so the fuel atomizes a little bit easier. It's not really necessary, especially in a warmer climate like the scooter's used in California, so it's probably not really an issue. And then sometimes that boot's a little bit hard to get. You can see how I got the screwdriver in there. And then nice and simple, you got a single throttle cable, and you just want to use an 8mm. You know, again, if you're handy, I mean, you could try cleaning this carburetor, but my instinct on it is you're going to always have a leaky accelerator pump, a leaky float bowl. This diaphragm is probably on the edge of failing. You just not really worth it, in my opinion. Let's see. So does that slide even move up? It actually does move up, but I don't know. Come on, it's a nice looking Vespa. Just start with a brand new carburetor. It's kind of like the heart of this scooter here. So here's the new carburetor. As you can see, it's really, really similar. There's only going to be one part that we are going to swap from this old carburetor. and that's going to be this little carb heater. So take a 12mm wrench, go ahead and spin that off. Again, that's not 100% necessary, this part, if you're using the scooter in warm climates, but it's already here, and I figured might as well just go ahead and install it. So the new carburetor, you can see, includes the vent hose. That's this black hose right here. That also permits you to drain the carburetor bowl, so there's that screw on the bottom. And go ahead and tighten that. And pretty much the carburetor's kind of got all the parts we need on there. The automatic choke is already in place, so we'll kind of have those wires off to the right. Kind of just the reverse order of operations. Go ahead and put the little barrel for the throttle cable, and that little 90-degree bracket of the throttle cable kind of goes on that right side of the carburetor. And we'll get an 8mm. Go ahead and tighten that. So it doesn't get much simpler than this. You can see that's against the throttle stop, so we know we have enough free play. That's good. The free play feels pretty good. If you do want to adjust the free play of the cable, you pull this boot back. This is a perfect time to do it. And just to show you, see how much that cable moves in and out? We could probably take some of that free play out. This is the best time to do it because the carburetor's out of the way. You always want to have a little bit of free play, so something like that is probably appropriate. Then go ahead and tighten the lock nut. And you can slide the little rubber boot right over. So it's still against the throttle stop. And we have the cables kind of going to the left, this little hose going to the right. We'll start with the intake right here. And just kind of roll it right on. And the pair of wires coming underneath the carburetor, they go in this little clip that's on the fan cover. You see that little clip? It's kind of right behind this hose here. And the idea of this little clip is it keeps the cables out of the throttle pulley, somewhere where you don't want the cables. So before we go any further, I'd replace the fuel line. This is like an OEM style fuel line. The Scooter West part number on the fuel line is CM007601TG, and it's kind of the premium quality fuel line. I'm sure if you search for Vespa LX or ET4 fuel line, you'll find this. These hose clips are really nice, much better than those worm gear hose clamps that somebody used before. And hose band 15-30 seconds is the correct size for this hose. So you can see they have a little cap on this. You may want to save that little cap. I'll show you what we'll do with that later. Go ahead and slide the hose. It's pretty important you try not to get any debris into the new carburetor. So slide the hose just like that. Wish I had a little bit better angle, but we could kind of just slide this onto the clamp or over the barb. So just use some type of tool that will move that right over and let it go right there. And now you have a nice secure fuel line connection. So that's pretty much everything you need to do to hook up the fuel line. I'll talk about this hose shortly. Not really needed, especially for these new replacement carburetors. So at this point, we're going to carefully tip that down and rock it into the intake manifold. You may want to spray a little bit of silicone spray, especially if it's extra difficult to get into the intake manifold. Even better yet, maybe just a good time to replace the intake manifold. And then you want to make sure it's pushed all the way in. So that little notch is like right there within the notch of this rubber intake manifold. So Loosen the clamp a little bit more. And typically I like to have the worm gear tightening part of the clamp on this left side of the scooter, just like such. And go ahead and tighten it down. I have seen where they fold the edge over, and that's not a good thing. So, same with this clamp right here. And we have this vent hose, and you can see on the left side of the motor, there's a little eyelet, a steel like eyelet that you can pull this hose through and push it right through that little. There we go. So before I push this fuel line through that dirty sheath right here that kind of keeps everything tidy, I would put something in the end just so you don't get any dirt in there. Maybe I'll use that little thing that came from the carburetor. And then we're gonna go ahead and feed it along with these other hoses. There's gonna be one hose that we're gonna pull out. It's that hose that goes on the side of the carburetor. We don't need that anymore. That's the one that went into this little elbow that's already here on the carburetor. And we'll go ahead and push the hose right through the sheath. Again, somebody did some silly stuff like put electrical tape on it. I'm not sure what they were doing there. And that's routed pretty close to where the fuel tap is, and we'll make those connections. So here's our brand new fuel tap. This is that vacuum hose with the little clip. So make that connection first. That's on the bottom, and I'll go ahead and just like the fuel line. And then I have the fuel line right here, and I put that little cap in there. And we'll put this little clamp on. And we'll go ahead and push that onto the barb of the fuel tap. And oftentimes, even with the clamp, you can kind of just rock it right in place, and it's gonna hold in place. I'll use a little needle nose to tighten that little clamp there. So that last hose, this is part of the evaporative emission system. You can get rid of this small hose, so just kind of twist that off and eliminate that hose. You are gonna end up with a T that's still open right here. It's a perfect opportunity to use that little cap. And it's a little on the loose side, but you can put a little zip tie around it just to close that up, or you can find a smaller vacuum cap that you can find at a normal automotive store to cap it off. You do want to have that capped off because there's a chance that liquid fuel will come out of that and drip on your hot muffler. And the last connection I'm gonna make is those two electrical connections at the carburetor. They have this little vinyl tube that usually can be reused. You just put it right over both those connections. Again, they're both the same connector. One's a male, one's a female, but they go to the mating connectors that come off the main wiring harness of the scooter. So that's kind of how those work. So before we start the scooter and put fuel in the carburetors, two things that aren't a bad idea to check and replace. First being the spark plug, and definitely the air filter. The foam air filter elements, usually they've deteriorated and rotted, and the last thing you need is to have a freshly started motor start ingesting old chunks of the air filter. So these are not exactly easy to get the spark plug caps off. So it's a cap that's right there. You could take the front cover off. So probably the easiest way to get the spark plug out is not from this door, but you can get access to the cap through this. So there's a single screw that comes out right from up here. I already loosened that. Pop that little door off. There were some models like the ET2 that you could totally access the carburetor or the spark plug through that hole. You want to take a long needle nose, and you can kind of get to the cap and just carefully rock it off. A lot of people end up damaging the spark plug caps because they are a brittle Bakelite material. And go ahead and pop that cap off. And while we're at it, we're gonna actually check for spark. So there's our ignition coil. They're pretty inexpensive. This cap looks to be in really good shape. There is one problem, is I do see a broken spark plug in the cap, which is not uncommon. This has got the Champion spark plugs, which were pretty horrible. Worst case is you could just replace the whole cap, which just unthreads from the wire here. The cap's sold as a separate part. Comes with the boot and everything, but you can see there's a broken spark plug in there. So this boot will pull right off, usually. And it's been on here for years and years, but, well, the cap certainly wasn't coming apart. It's got a broken spark plug in it. Let's just start with a new one. So a couple parts you're gonna need. The rubber boot, part number on Scooter West web store is A28210. And then of course the Y2K cap, and that's gonna be 293845-90 is the correct cap for these Vespas here. So it comes with the little insulator for the wire, and of course dielectric grease is gonna be your friend. So something like this doesn't need to be this large of a Cheese Whiz tube, but get that in place, and you thread the cap onto the wire. And sometimes the wire, it won't really thread very nicely. Sometimes you cut the wire down a little bit, just a tiny bit off the wire. And then we're gonna go ahead and put the boot on here, and you don't need much of that dielectric grease, just enough to kind of make it all slide right on there. And before we go any further, it's a good time just to check for spark. So the correct OEM spark plug is the actual genuine Y2K Piaggio Vespa spark plug, CR8EB. The original plugs they were using in this era were Champion plugs. If it hasn't been dropped, the gap's already gonna be correct at like 6 to 7/10 of a millimeter, somewhere in that range. And this is where you could get shocked. So be careful. I have the spark plug grounded out. I'm just gonna give it a little bump. And I see a nice bright spark there. So we're good there. And that spark plug goes in and out with a nice snap. So that's good to start with a fresh cap. Now we're gonna move underneath the seat to change out the spark plug. All right, so I got a 5/8 spark plug socket, preferably one with a hex on the end. And go ahead and pull this door straight up. So that door is pretty important. I see a lot of people take them off and they somehow just accidentally lose them. That's integral to the cooling of the engine. It's an air-cooled motor, so it relies on that shroud. So I'm gonna go ahead and carefully, I'm using my hand through that spark plug door access hole, and from the top, pop the cap on there. And we'll use something like this ratchet. There's just not much space to access the cap. I have a lot of people say, I just want to change this spark plug for the fun of it. Well, it's not exactly a fun job. So typically a spark plug, lasts about 7,000 miles on these scooters. So if it's regularly used, it's not something you need to really mess with. And once it's starting to loosen up, kind of unthread on its own here. You definitely don't want to drop the spark plug into the fan shroud as well. You'll need like a magnet or something to retrieve it. So it's a pretty long spark plug. Got like about 1 inch of threads on it. And we're just about there. So kind of juggling both to get the spark plug out and keeping the socket from dropping. Yeah, exactly what I didn't want to do, but I was able to get the remains of that crappy Champion spark plug out of here. Not unusual that they break like that. Doesn't have that many miles on it, but it's good. We're replacing it with the better spark plug that shortly, after these years, they went to the better Y2K spark plug. So go ahead and put it in the spark plug socket. and then you kind of got to feel your way around to get it started. And it's absolutely important that you get it started successfully by hand. If it doesn't start going in nice and smoothly, stop, because the last thing you need to do is cross-threaded this super long spark plug into the threads of the spark plug hole. Don't need to put any anti-seize on here or anything. Just go ahead and thread it as far as you can by hand. And there you go, it's seated. And they probably do have a torque for it, but you never get a torque wrench in there. But I'll get the ratchet in there and kind of just feel it's crushing the washer. Now it's getting much tighter, and that's where you want to stop. That's all you need to go. Don't need to really crank on it. Carefully get the socket out of here. And while I'm doing this, there's one thing, the scooter's rocking around because I have the front clamped and it's off the center stand. It makes for the job to be much, much easier. So keep that in mind. If it looks easy for me, because I do have the scooter off the center stand. So I'm gonna go ahead and slide that little door in place. Snaps right in place, and then take the spark plug. I know you can't see it because of this metal dam. Kind of fish it right into the hole. And so far I'm pretty certain we're gonna have fuel. Brand new carburetor in there. You know, once I put gas in the tank, it's gonna take a little bit for it to prime into the carburetor. Go ahead and snap that on and make sure it's nice and tight. And next we're gonna move on to the air filter. So pretty important you would change out the air filter as well, because I suspect it's gonna be completely rotted and falling apart. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and change the air filter. Somebody has a wrong screw. Some goofy screw that's definitely not right. It should be a screw that looks more like that. So throw that thing in the trash. And we'll go ahead and pull this side skirt off. It makes for accessing the air cleaner much easier. So that pulls out those rubber grommets right there. And you can see it's been oozing some oil and grease. Several screws that hold the air box cover in place. Some other things you should be thinking about when resurrecting a barn find modern Vespa. Not only the tires, that drive belt is a rubber part, just like a fan belt in a car, and it's 20 years old. It might only have 2,000 miles on it, but I bet you it's showing signs of dry rot as well. So better safe than sorry. You know, you don't want to be riding around, get stranded with a broken drive belt. Or even worse, sometimes it jams up. So you might want to watch some of my videos on how to change the drive belt on your modern Vespa. So I got screws here, here, and here. There's a little snorkel that attaches to this side of the airbox that usually will pop right off. So it's a rubber boot. It will pop it back in place. And about right here, it's gonna be a thumb screw, as they call them. So show you what that looks like when I remove it. So it's just that little screw, and there's gonna be one more kind of at the very top of the air box up here. And sometimes you gotta get like a plier on them to get them started if they're really tight. There we go, got that one started. So let's see how this air filter looks here. It's already oozing out like oil and probably fuel or whatever leaked in here. So a little bit of goo coming out. Not too bad, I'll probably still clean that cover. And there's the filter. Actually, it's pretty clean, but see how it's just super, this isn't the worst I've seen. I've seen where they are completely rotted. And the problem with that is you'll end up sucking parts of the air filter into the engine. So you can just use some disposable shop rags to kind of wipe up the mess. Wipe up that oozed oil and dirt kind of collecting on top of this motor here. We'll spray this cover out. You have the inside of this air box, make sure those two screws are tight. The replacement air filter that's specific for the ET4 and the ET450 or ET2 would be the 487401. We probably also have the premium version, which is the original Vespa that would be already oiled. But if it's a dry filter like this basic filter is, you want to have something like this spray-on air filter oil, and the part number is oil air filter on the Scooter West web store. Don't need to get too crazy. You definitely want to wear gloves. It's an air stall spray. Pretty important that these are oiled because that's how it traps the dirt. So, and at that point, kind of just wring it into the air filter. Doesn't need to be dripping wet, but enough where it's kind of got oil kind of all over it. So go ahead and set that filter right into the lid, or not into the box itself. You can kind of see it just sets just like that. And another thing to consider, I'm not going to deal with it right now, is there is a rubber gasket in this groove of the airbox. We do have those gaskets available. Oftentimes customers say, why is there oil leaking on top of the belt cover? And it's because that gasket's deteriorated, along with the air filter could be over-oiled, or the scooter could have tipped over, so engine oil would have gone through the breather and contaminated the oil filter, or you just got a worn out motor where it puts a lot of oil into the air box. So go ahead and put this cap back up in place, kind of shift that boot. These do have they do breathe from just underneath the seat, so there's like a little rubber boot. It's unique to the ET4s, something LX didn't have. So I'm holding the airbox cover in place, and we'll just start installing the screws. And the best way to start these screws is go backwards. You kind of feel them drop in, and then they thread in really nice. If you're cutting new threads every time, it's going to wear out the plastic that these thread into. So going backwards a little bit where it drops in, and then going in, that's always the best technique with these screws that go into plastic here. So now we're getting close. Hopefully we'll start up and we'll be idling, and definitely don't want to be riding on that tire. I see all the cracks in there. It's completely bald. There's cracks on that tire. And the last two, which are the thumb screws, and I gotta work those a little bit more. They could get a little right angle screwdriver on there as well. That kind of just operating blind because the fasteners are a little bit hidden. And that little boot, usually you could just snap it back in onto the intake. The other option is you could just cut the zip tie, but usually it will just snap right in place. So you can pop that cover back in place, but if you're going to do the belt job, you probably just want to leave it off. It's obviously not critical for the operation. It's more of a little beauty cover, get it snapped in place there. Put the correct style screw. And we'll get fresh gas. I got about 1.5 gallons of fresh gas put into the tank. All right, so I got a gas can with some good gas in it. And just kind of watch for leaks. If the fuel tap's not all the way in correctly, could end up with a leak. I've rarely ever seen a damaged fuel tank unless the scooter's been severely crashed. All right, so fuel cap's back in place. I'll leave the seat up and go and turn the ignition on. We know the immobilizer light just flashes once, that's a good thing. And I'm gonna pull a brake. And that starter clutch, the starter Bendex is definitely gonna need some service. Look out for fuel leaks. You're gonna crank quite a bit. There we go. Started right up. First time in probably, like I thought, about 10 years. So you're definitely gonna wanna let it warm up. You wanna do an oil change after this. After it warms up, look out for any leaks, both oil leaks and fuel leaks. Usually with the brand new carburetor, the base settings are a good starting point. So we'll let it warm up a little bit, because once it comes off the choke, that's when you want to adjust the idle. And that may, if it's a cold day, maybe a few minutes. So while we're allowing the motor to warm up, I'm going to go ahead and check the voltage. You can even see the idles kind of faltering a little bit. So we're at 12.9 volts. And I saw the voltage rising. So now that the motor's warmed up, the idle speed has dropped a little bit. We're going to rev it up. So I see 13.9 volts, that's appropriate charging voltage, so no issues there. And you can see it's kind of, there you go, it stalled on its own. And the first thing we're going to adjust is the actual idle speed, which is the silver screw on the top of the carburetor, now that the automatic choke is shut off. Go ahead and turn it in. Give it a couple little revs. Now it's a little bit too high, so the idle screw is this one right here on the top, and it adjusts the stop for your throttle. And then you got the mixer screw, which is right here, and you may need a smaller screwdriver than this to make adjustments to that mixer screw. Typically the mixer screw should be anywhere from a turn and a half to no more than 3 turns out, and you'd go all the way in. I think the base adjustment's about 2 1/4 turns. So I want to kind of go for a little bit smoother idle here. It's kind of like has a chug kind of to it. That's better there. Idle speed's a little high, so now we got to back it out sometimes. And obviously we'll take it on a test ride when we get to that point after changing oil on the tires, and may make additional adjustments to the carburetor. The goal is you don't want it stalling. You definitely don't want it so high that the tire is spinning where the clutch is engaging. But at this point, we got a scooter that's running. Kind of smells like I can burning off the old dust and everything that's settled onto the motor. Motor's getting warm. This would be a perfect time to drop the oil and change the oil filter as well, now that the motor's a little bit warmed up and you warmed up that old original oil that's been in there for years. So it's kind of broken free anything that was in it. So I'm going to drain that really cold oil that's been sitting forever. If it's not contaminated with fuel or anything, or you could probably, like the situation I have here, run it for a little bit and then go ahead and change it. Like I said, the tires, before I even take it out, I could tell the front brake has got some issues. There's another issue with this scooter. See this handlebar? See how it detents to the center? It's gonna ride pretty bad. And that's usually an indication that the grease, especially this low miles, the grease is completely hardened in those fork bearings. So probably gonna need at minimum an upper fork bearing or re-grease the bearings. Sometimes if they're high miles, they get it, what I like to say is a detent in the fork bearing. That makes for a really miserable ride when you don't have a smooth motion of the steering. For the front brakes, I'd start by flushing it. But I can tell you one of our hot selling items is brake master cylinders and the calipers for this era scooter. So the brake fluid is just completely going to mud. It's contaminated and corroded the brake components. And the problem with bad brake components is you end up with a tire. See that tire? Doesn't turn freely at all because that's the brake dragging. So don't be surprised if you're going to end up needing to replace both the brake master cylinder. I have videos covering how to change that out, along with possibly a brake caliper. Another thing to look out for in the front end is the speedometer drive and the wheel bearings. Again, that grease is well over 20 years old at this point on this age of a scooter, and it's completely dried up and hardened to something that resembles more of a wax than grease. You're gonna have to tear it apart and clean all that old grease out. In some cases, we've had to replace the whole front hub. That includes the bearings to fix that. So certainly don't want to be taking on a ride with the front tire that's sticking, let alone those tires that have pretty good sized cracks in them that are 20 years old. So it's great, we got a running scooter, but so much more to do. You can check out all my videos on the Vespa Motorsport YouTube channel. Just search for Vespa Motorsport. I have well over 900 videos, mostly about Vespas. And just search for those various subjects and you can see prior videos on how to service the other items. Another good video that was a similar scooter is what to expect on an older Vespa. And I have a silver ET4 that had all the same symptoms that this one has from sitting, along with some corrosion related damage as well. And I covered what I found, and that was a pretty popular video. I hope you found that pretty useful. The nice thing is these are great do-it-yourself, first-time mechanic kind of scooters. Pretty simple to get back up and running, and nice and reliable and easy to keep going once you're using this regularly. I have customers that have 40, 50, 60, 70,000 miles on old ET4s and LXs. They just ride them every day to work or whatever they do, and they're still hanging in there. Well, heck, I want them to come and buy a new scooter, but they just would rather just throw a little money every year, keep their old trusty ET4 LX running. And there's something to be said about something you can keep on the road with little effort for 20 years. So thanks again for watching. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com here in San Diego, California. Hope you found that one useful. See you on the next one.